The Q&A segment is going to be split into two parts. The first is a general question and answer from the Google Forms. And after that, I will allow all of you to unmute your mics, and then you can proceed with further questions if you have any. All right? Samuel, if you're ready, I'll yield the floor to you.
I can't unmute myself. Okay, right. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. So I'm Sam, and thanks for spending this morning with me. First, I'm actually going to go through some of the questions that you've submitted into the Google Forms. If you want to add more to that because you're more comfortable adding the questions there, please go ahead. And once I finish running through all of that, then you can actually ask questions directly here. We'll unmute you. You can just raise your hands, and then Joel will unmute you one by one, and we can start answering the questions. So I'll run through the questions. First of all, first question was, what was stylistic persuasion? That was asked right before the video started. I hope that the video answers some of that question for you, but it's an appreciation of the fact that when we're debating, it's not just about delivering a speech. It's not just about getting points from judges. The point of this activity is for us to learn how to persuade people, get people to change their minds, so that if in the future, if we're trying to change our bosses' minds, our clients' minds, if you're a leader, if you're a politician, if you're a lawyer, you know how to change people's minds. And persuasion comes not purely from a rational perspective. When you're writing arguments, you need to use your vocalization to be effective. And we know that a lot of politicians have been effective because they were able to use this stylistic persuasion. And this is where we actually give and impart some of these skills to you through debate education. So second question is implicit argumentation more persuasive than explicit argumentation? Depends. I'll give you two scenarios for you to consider. One, explicit argumentation is where you're very didactic. You're literally beating someone over the head and saying that this policy of using the death penalty is very problematic because you end up sending innocent people to jail, and that's just not something that we want to do. Very straightforward, but this is something that judges, opponents within the debate sphere, they're very comfortable about. But if you're talking to ordinary individuals who are not debaters, right? And they are very uncomfortable about talking about this issue, or they may be very resistant to this idea. A lot of Singaporeans firmly believe in the use of the death penalty. So you may need to use more implicit argumentation, starting perhaps with a story of a young 16-year-old who was pressured into carrying drugs, and his family was threatened, and that's why he did it, and now he's about to be executed. Or someone who was so poor, was unable to get a good lawyer, and actually is wrongfully convicted. That becomes a lot more powerful in terms of argumentation. So that's one scenario. The second scenario is where you yourself find that you can't find the words to be very explicit in arguing, right, why it's wrong. So you may have some difficulty trying to explain why the state shouldn't intervene and shouldn't interfere and should respect your privacy, but you're having difficulty finding a much more direct theoretical construct as to why the state shouldn't actually cross that privacy barrier. So you actually want to use a personal anecdote of how terrifying it was when you realize, perhaps you relay the story of how your parents and your siblings managed to unlock your phone, and they managed to actually start reading your text messages. Now that, right, actually creates an emotional connection with the listener, who are now similarly horrified, and they basically appreciate what you're trying to say about the dangers of government intrusion better than any sort of explicit argumentation that you could have done. Can the meeting be unlocked? I leave this one to Joel, right? Is the video repeating over and over again? Yeah, there's some lag when there is video sharing. So if you want to see the video again, or just want to go to a specific part that you may have missed, then we can actually put the link available for you so that you can view it straight on YouTube, right? And then you can catch up on those again. When can we put in personal anecdotes? Okay, if we want to put in a component into the speech that might not always be directly related to the content of the speech and you just want to establish that, starts of the speeches are probably the best because that still gives you a little bit of time for the rest of the speech to then focus on the content, and that's probably when you have the most flexibility. The second reason why you can do it at the start is that it establishes a connection between you and the audience members and the judge before the rest of the speech, and the whole point of the anecdote was to create that connection and to warm the room up, so that's usually a good time to start. Keep in mind, however, that depending on the length of time you have available for your speeches, you may want to be careful about how much time you allocate to your anecdotes. If you're doing the full World Schools Debating Championships format, you have 8 minutes in your speech. That's a lot of time. And you can actually devote like 30 seconds to just delivering a speech. And we've had very good international teams like Team Scotland, Team Ireland, for instance. Some of the more successful teams, it may even have them speaking for a minute, just delivering jokes, right? And so that's a way to start. But if you have only 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, then you're going to have to make these anecdotes a lot shorter and try to make it a lot more impactful as well. Next question, is it more important for the third speaker to have style to be able to convince the judge rather than for the rebuttals to the opponent's policy? Okay, good question, because I want to take this chance to clarify. Style is not a substitute for content and strategy, right? So you cannot just go out there and say, I'm going to be the most eloquent, stylish speaker, but if your content and strategy scores are low, that's not good for your team either. So it has to complement what you're doing. And you also have to realize that the stylistic tools that you would use as a third speaker will have to be very different from what the first speaker is doing, because the first speakers may still have a little bit more free time, as it were, because they don't have all that material and the rebuttal material piling up. But to be honest, right, as a third speaker, you've got a lot of things to go through. So your jokes have to be a little bit quicker, your anecdotes a little bit shorter as well, but you can still do it. Reply speakers can also start to put in more of these stylistic elements. But the things I mentioned about the third speaker, the thing about clarity, being able to speak clearly so that you're not tripping over your words, etc. That's actually very important for the third. A lot of thirds assume that because I have so much material, I have to speak faster. But in doing so, the things that I described in the video actually tends to happen more. You trip over your words, you say the wrong word, you backpedal, start the sentence all over again. You become very wordy. And a lot of thirds are actually very slow in delivery, but they cover a lot of ground because they're very precise in this case. Are there competitions that focus on style in Singapore? Yes. One, we have national level competitions. It's a bit of a problem, of course, with COVID. So they can't really have a lot of the traditional tournaments before, but ACJC just conducted a tournament called Orators, and that was essentially all done online. People submitted their speeches and then they were evaluated and graded. It's a little bit harder to do an impromptu speech tournament, but you can still, try to at least go for the prepared speech tournaments as well. The second thing is that if you cannot find these sort of tournaments being made available through your debate club, it's possible that your school is actually handling public speaking and oratory events under a different department. So perhaps under the English department. So they might not always have an overlap. So one way is for you to make sure that these invitations come to the debaters as well. Another way is for the debate club to actually have an internal speech competition. When all the freshmen or the Sec 1s or the newbies come in, you just start with a speech tournament. So you don't have to worry about argumentation and substantives. Just get them to deliver speeches which are fun, etc. And that also gives them a slightly easier, more approachable way of getting into public speaking without having to worry about argumentation and rebuttals at the start. Another activity, and this one is a little bit more controversial in terms of whether it's good for style or not, but if you approach it well, you can. And those are things like model UNs and other conferences that allows you to speak on a controlled tempo without the time pressure that you might have in debate, but it doesn't always put a premium on public speaking. So this is actually, those are some of the competitions that you have available. Can the personal anecdotes be given by the first and second speaker? Absolutely, you can, right? You still have time but remember what I said earlier, they should get shorter and shorter as the debate progresses. Can I incorporate a substantive in it? Now, you have to be careful because when we're talking about persuasion through logic, and that's what the substantive is trying to do, a personal anecdote will help to make it clearer, but it might not necessarily lead to logical persuasion because the judge may think that that's just you, that's a personal story. Is that actually truly universal? So this could be something that you use at the start of the debate, right? And you can connect it again as the style point through the substantive, but you need real examples as well. If you wanted to talk about the dangers of sugary drinks, like this Coca-Cola that I'm drinking, and you want to put a text on it, you can actually talk about your struggles with your sugar levels and your weight and how difficult it was for you to actually get into it. People kept complaining that I was a person who was very easy to see, and that's the sort of jokes that you can put in, a little bit self-effacing, and then you can reconnect it to your substantive later if you want to as well, but you can't build your entire substantive around your own personal anecdote. Okay, what is Q&A? Questions and answers. Okay, how do you modulate, or what are some of the exercises you can carry out to modulate? Okay, modulation essentially is about providing variation. You're changing the way that you speak. So whatever variable that you have in your speech, you change it from time to time. I can go high volume, I can go low volume. I can go very heavy emphasis pitch here, right? I can speed up and really deliver very fast. Or I can go very, very slow. So you're talking about changing it up. Now, the reason why we want modulation is that the human ear is really conditioned to, and the human brain is conditioned to start tuning out things which become regular. You get bored by things which are regular, and you're always seeking novel input, okay? How do we know this? For instance, if you are used to a certain smell, eventually you stop smelling that smell. So, I mean, this is one of the things that when I talk to garbage collectors, they said, thank goodness they cannot smell the garbage anymore, right? Their nose has become completely desensitized to that. And in the same way, when people see the same thing and hear the same thing again and again, it gets very monotonous and very boring. If you're watching Michael Bay's Transformer movies, I mean, the first series of explosions is very exciting, but when you realize that every scene is an explosion, you just lose interest. And that's basically why you need to modulate. And in terms of the exercises that you can do, it's about that pitch variation. So you basically demarcate, okay, I'm going to change speed, right, for these sentences. The sentences I have highlighted in red, I will go fast, because anything in red makes you go fast. Anything in green, I go slow. Or I'm going to underline certain words. Every time I see an underlined word, I'm going to say that word louder, right? And so these are some of the things that you can practice, right? Modulation. Any research links to share, etc. There's a ton of it. Okay, I don't think that I'm going to be able to type all of them out here, but I like this question because I just want you to be aware of the fact that simple Google searches that basically talks about how can I improve style, etc., is very useful for debaters. But the problem is that a lot of debaters end up searching only for debate style tips, right? Or they're trying to find tips on debate. And you will find that a lot of the videos that are available online will be just videotapes of debates, or they may be talking more about content. They talk a lot more about strategy sometimes, but it's really about argumentation and refutation. So you're like, but there's nothing related to debate style. So I actually dip into other related fields. I look at public speaking style tips, oratory style tips. I look at theater tips, singing tips, etc. And then they have a bunch of research. And a lot of these people do these for a living, right? They are in theater, people are singing professionally. So they have actually shared a whole bunch of these things. So for instance, this is something that people at the actual World Schools Debating Championships get very weirded about, because they see Team Singapore doing all these weird tongue twisters and you know, articulating certain consonants like but throughout their preparation. It looks completely silly, but theater people, singers, if they see that, they know exactly what's happening. They're basically loosening up their vocal muscles and their jaw and their neck muscles, etc. And they're also making sure that you won't be tripping over the words that they try to deliver later on. So these are some of the things that we can actually find online, and then we can have. Do you have any favorite public speakers? Right. I mean, a lot of the people that I've actually heard who are fantastic politicians are actually quite good. And Obama is a particular favorite of mine because he is someone who is the mastery of code switching. That means that if he's speaking to a predominantly Black audience, he speaks in a certain way, and his ability to connect with them, it's a little bit gangster, but he's very comfortable with himself. He's very self-effacing. He's willing to poke fun of himself, like, you know, pointing at his big ears, etc. But he can also bring that gravitas that is necessary for as someone who is president of the United States, right? And I'll give you, this is going to be interesting, but okay, so I find Donald Trump to be fairly abhorrent as a human being, and his policies are like quite bad. But his public speaking style, even though it is very annoying for people to listen to him, it sounds like he's not exactly a stable genius. His speech is actually quite effective, right? Because it gets through to the people that he's actually trying to get across to. Because when you ask people, what do you remember from the 2016 presidential campaign between what Hillary Clinton said and what Donald Trump said? People remember what Trump said: build a wall. And here's the unfortunate thing: lock her up, right? Crooked Hillary. Nobody remembers what Hillary said. And that's the weird thing, is that you can find a way to pitch it across so that you just get the main points carried across. The Republicans have been traditionally very good at that. So if you leave Donald Trump to it, right, and he just starts tweeting, right, it basically is very inarticulate. But he does recognize that there are some speech patterns, if you keep using them repeatedly, they're effective. So for instance, whenever he makes a reference to this phrase, believe me, folks, believe me, people believe him, right? And so that's the sort of thing where he's able to just use his authority to just get the point across. So that's kind of interesting as well. Interesting and favorite public speaker to examine as a specimen, right? What kind of jokes and anecdotes might be helpful to persuade the judges and audience members? Okay, so here is where you're trying to have that connection. I'll go a little bit deeper into that connection as well, right? I've often found that you want to create 3 levels of connections, and you can create 3 levels of connections. One, you can establish yourself as the authority. So this is to show that I know what I'm talking about. So as mentioned earlier, right, the motion is on immigration. I opened my speech with, when I arrived in Singapore, in Changi Airport, as an immigrant, right, I was petrified because this was a country that seemed so alien from where I came from. This is just to show that I know what I'm talking about. The second type is I'm at the same level as everyone. I'm a part of you, right? So if I'm delivering a lecture in ACJC, now that's my old school. So I often start with, hey guys, how's everyone doing? By the way, I'm from class 2AH, and this used to be my teacher. I see she is still teaching you. And that creates some connection that I'm one of them, right? Or like, hey guys, I'm a football fan, right? Okay, and then do you know how, right, okay, like how Manchester United is doing, right? Okay, thank goodness we've got salvation now. Bruno is here, right? Okay, so that's the sort of connection that I make with them. You can also use jokes to connect them to all of these things as well. So I'm like, how do you, I mean, if you have a vacuum cleaner that's broken, right? How do you make it work again, right? Because then I say, oh, then you put a sticker of Arsenal Football Club on it, because then it'll suck again. Right, so that's the kind of jokes that you can put across, right, to try to connect. The third layer, it's something that you very rarely have to use, but if you suspect that people are kind of in awe of you and they don't really dare to ask you questions, right? And this happens because you're being introduced sometimes as, this is the leader, this is the captain. So for instance, I'm a captain in the Singapore Armed Forces, and I command a rifle company. So if I go out there and say, I'm the officer commanding, you're listening to me, I can't get them to ask me questions. Everybody's just like, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm not going to ask questions at all. So sometimes I actually lower myself, meaning I try to make myself sound as pathetic as possible, right? Just to make it more sympathetic, and people are like, oh, he's a bit of an underdog as well. So, you know, when I had to give a talk in some of the SAP schools like Nanhua or in River Valley, they might be a little bit intimidated about asking questions, because usually they introduce me as, oh, here's someone took a PSC scholarship, it's at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he's went to Harvard, and then nobody wants to ask questions anymore. So the first thing that I would usually do is to mention the fact that I am from Anglo-Chinese. Your level of Chinese is so impressive, I'm just petrified, whereas my school really is Anglo minus Chinese, and I'm just scared, right? And so that actually makes them feel a little bit better about people. But this is not something you usually have to do for debate. Jokes are a little bit scary to use. Why? Because you can totally bomb with jokes in a number of ways. One, your joke is not funny and you just hear crickets, but you need to embrace the fact that that can happen and just move on. But jokes can also end up offending. So you have to be very, very careful, because usually here are the 4 topics that you're usually told you shouldn't talk about: race, religion, sex, politics, right? These are very sensitive issues. You shouldn't talk about these 4 things. But the jokes from these 4 things are usually the funniest as well. So it's very, very risky. What you can do for jokes, and this is something that comedians do your research. Comedians are always kind of copying from each other. They have researchers who are actually trolling the internet trying to find more material from them. Comedians are always accusing each other of stealing material. I think there's a video of Russell Peters, a stand-up comedian, who is actually calling out Trevor Noah because he believes that Trevor Noah stole his routine, right? And so that kind of things can happen as well. So jokes you have to practice. Stylistic competitions are fantastic places for jokes to be put in. And I think that if you recall the video you saw of the original oratory speaker, his long joke about the Pepsi commercial was actually very effective, right? And it actually kind of made the point as well about what his speech was in the end. So be careful about the jokes, but if you can use them well, they're very, very effective. You have to practice them. Does being stylistic have to be subtle in the points that you have, or should it be something that stands out in your speech? I think that both, right? Okay, just working to be clearer using the correct words. Now that's a very subtle thing. Instead of just saying that your policy is bad, if you end up saying your policy is counterproductive and it will have uncontrollable consequences, it's a lot more precise and the sense of chaos is magnified. But that was subtle, right? But if you want to be very explicit in your stylistic use, then it's your, I'm going to spend 15 seconds telling a joke. That's very explicit, but that can work out as well. Okay. When writing a speech, should there be a balance between logical and emotional persuasion, or is it dependent on the motion itself? I'm going to be honest with you. If you have that 60 minutes to prepare, you're going to spend about at least 50 of those minutes focusing on the logical. But it's hard to get that case prepared, especially if you've got teammates and you need to coordinate everything and rebuttal. What I'm asking for is that, one, you work on your stylistic element, and this is not something you can do within the preparation. This is something that you need to do between trainings on your own so that it becomes a part of you, that you do it very naturally, that you basically do it as a second nature. But you can spend that 5 minutes during the prep thinking, what's a very suitable joke? Or what thematic, story should I actually add here? So for instance, I had a debate about whether we should allow the church to continue to have the ability to, the church as any religious organization, to actually have the ability to recognize marriages, or should marriages be a purely state institution with no interference from religion? So I might then decide, okay, for my reply, I am actually going to do this, right? Okay, so I would pretend that I'm holding a holy book and I go, dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to discuss the holy matrimony between the church and the state, right? So that kind of small little thing just to show that you're having a bit of fun, right, while you're delivering this speech as well. Okay, I'm hearing that that question again: is implicit argumentation more persuasive than explicit argumentation? I explained it earlier, right? Okay, so we can go back to that. Thank you. Does the use of a preamble heavily affect the style score? Okay. I'm assuming that the preamble is just something that you use to preface what's actually going to come later. The preamble can help and hinder in the following ways. One, it can help because it basically helps to tell the judge and the audience what you intend to talk about. And it can actually help with clarity because they know where you're going. It also helps you stay on track in terms of this is what I intend to talk about. You're also using the preamble to add in some of those stylistic components like personal anecdotes, etc. So that's not a bad thing. But here's how they can hinder. When you have very limited time, that preamble, if it ends up taking 30 seconds, 45 seconds, that might be time that you really could not afford to spare. Right, but stylistically, it can actually be quite, useful, right, to do that. But that's not the only time you can be stylistic. So please don't think that I'll be stylish for 30 seconds and then I go back to just doing whatever I was doing, right? So you're using that first 15 seconds or 20 seconds for that emotional connection, right? So that you're doing the persuasiveness. You can, if you're using a quote to start your speech, instead of just saying, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about whether we should ban firearms." And it's a very blah opening. But if you want to do quotings from someone, okay? Power comes from the barrel of a gun. And when that power is given to criminals, then we have given these criminals the right to rule over us. That is why we need to ban guns altogether. Now, power comes from the barrel of a gun is a quote by Mao Zedong. I'm not even making use of its original meaning, but that quote, right, is powerful. People get where I'm going with this, and that's why I'm using it in order to get that effect, right? So you can use it to create that stylistic impact, right, at the start as well. Okay. What is the highest score anyone can get for start? 32. This is for the World Schools Debating Championships format. It has been brought to my attention that a lot of speakers do not actually know what the rules of the World Schools Debating Championships format is, or what the rules of the SSSDC is. The tournament handbook is often given, but people don't read it, and they've actually been operating purely based on what they do within the training sessions, which is a bit bizarre. It's like people playing football without a full appreciation of knowing all the rules, like what is offside and can I basically pick up. You know, if I'm a goalkeeper and my defender throws me the ball from a throw-in, can I pick it up with my hands? These are just basic rules that we need to know. But a lot of debaters have not actually read the rules. The World Schools Debating Championship rules and the other associated rules that we have as well. And if you go to the World School Debating Championships website, please look at it, and you can click on resources, right? You will find the explanations and the rules. You'll find a guideline for adjudicators so that you know what the judges are looking out for, right? So once you have that, then you have an idea of, okay, this is what they're being briefed upon, and this is what I'm actually supposed to do in this case. But the highest score that you can get is 32, 28 being the average. So you want to score as high as possible, all right, in this case. So just a general question, what is the difference between the JC and the poly debate circuits? Okay, good question, right? One, the formats that they're using are actually a little bit different. So for one, the students in the JC circuit will primarily be using the full World Schools Debating Championships format, and then the students on the poly debate circuit will generally be using the Asian parliamentary debate format. From time to time, both of these debaters will switch to do other formats such as British parliamentary if they're taking part in BP tournaments, and maybe Australs for some of the poly debaters as well. And some people have asked, is there any difference between the World Schools Debating Championships format and the Asian parliamentary format? And when people try to describe the differences between those two formats, I think some people just tend to put the focus on some of the more superficial things. So they say, oh, the speeches in World Schools are 8 minutes long, they're 7 minutes in Asians, and the prep time is 60 minutes, and Asians is 30 minutes. I urge everyone not to differentiate debate formats purely based on those superficial things. I think you can see with the World Schools Debating Championships format, you can modify the speech times and it's still generally the World Schools format. So Mark Gabriel has decided to shorten WSDC for his SSSDC by making it 6 minutes for Division 1 and 2, and Division 3 will be 5 minutes. And then the prep time can also be shortened and lengthened. I think a better differentiation between the formats that you want to emphasize would probably be that at the World Schools Debating Championships, right, there's still a World Schools Council, and they still put a very heavy premium on debate as education. Right? So this is why when they conduct these debating activities, they are willing to compromise on some things that people might feel is not competitive. So which means that in a competition, they say, oh, we should use power pairing because that's just a fairer system. But it's not always about fairness that they're looking for. And I know that you're like, well, a tournament cannot be fair. But here's the thing. We're not saying that it's a completely arbitrary thing. It's just that they are using a methodology that puts the emphasis on learning, which is why the council has always refused when requested to get rid of the content style strategy categories, because they want the judges to still make an effort to score each individual speaker on a distinct category and make the effort to try to provide feedback on each of these categories. Whereas for AP, each of the speakers tend to get one holistic score, 75 is the average. And as a result, you won't always get that distinctive, right? Here's what you did right stylistically, here's what you did correct on a content level, and here's what you did correct on the strategy level. So it doesn't come across in the three ways at all. So that's the end of the questions on the written Q&As. I'm very happy to entertain questions directly from you if you want to just verbalize some questions. If you wish to, just click on raise your hand, I think, and then Joelle can, and just unmute you so that you can ask the questions. Any questions? There's one from Arthur.
You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Arthur.
All right. So I was wondering, is there a particular format that you recommend for style in particular? Meaning, the way you formulate your argument, is there something you can recommend for it and still be able to fit in your content and your strategy?
Okay. Sorry, I'll break it down into two ways, because you were talking about formulating your arguments, right? As well as talking about how you can just improve on your style in general as well. One, right? When you are working on your argumentation, right? Recall that what I wanted primarily in terms of style when it comes to your arguments, which are based on logical persuasion, which is really trying to tap into the brain, right, of the audience members, your emphasis is on clarity, right? So when it comes to clarity, that means that you really want to put emphasis on, okay, is my speed good? Can I be heard and understood, right? And am I actually getting the precision of the language across to the people that actually understands you? So a good way to measure that is you just focus on delivering one substantive or one rebuttal, and then you review your videos after recording them to see, am I clear, right? So you're basically delivering these substantives with an emphasis on style and say, today I'm going to be working on making sure that I make my subs clearer so that people understand. A good test is to, if you want to improve your style to the max, right? And this will actually bring you beyond the debate circuit, is to get someone who's not a debater, right? A friend, to actually have the ability to listen to you and say, does this argument make sense to you? And you're not a debater. If they understand you, that means that you're very clear in this case. Whereas if you want to use the other portions about trying to convince them, right? Then, okay, some of the thing we talked about, the elements you put at the start of your speech is there, but you can also start to change your pitch, right? Your delivery to put more emphasis. So you look at the script, let's say you've typed out that argument, which are the words that you would underline because they're more important, right? And here's a little trick. You can change your facial expression. And when you change your facial expression as you speak, the way that you sound actually comes across really differently. If you look at my face and I'm really frowning now, and the moment I frown, right, it changes the timbre of my voice and I generally sound a little bit, it's very hard for me to keep this face and talk about the world is actually coming together and we're all happy. It's quite hard. But at the same time, right, when you open up your face and go happy, right, then even if you're talking about very scary stuff, you still sound quite happy. You know, there's this genocidal issue in Myanmar, right? So it's something that you can do to just make sure that the way that you speak connects to what your intended message was. Because if you're not careful about that, I have heard speakers who are talking like, so for instance, here's a very simple trick. You're talking about a policy and you want to talk about your policy solving the issue. So when you describe the problem, you say, I need to sound as angry as possible, right? And I say, angry, furrow your brows, right? Okay, a little bit quicker, volume may be louder. Then you say, okay, I now talk about the solution. Now that our solution is applied, then you should be happy. right? You sound a little bit slower, right? Okay. You know, when we finally put in the ban on guns, that's when we were able to take guns completely away from the black market. Guns just didn't exist anymore, and children stopped getting shot in schools. We're so happy we've implemented the ban on guns. So that's how you match your tone to your intended message within your argumentation. And so this is to augment whatever it is that you're saying. All right. I hope that answers some of the stuff that you were going to, Arthur. Right. Oh, before someone else asks, just keep it. I'll try to go into as much detail as I can, but this is the sort of thing that actually requires like either a fully substantive workshop, you know, where you're working on it constantly. As adults, a lot of executives actually ask for these sort of workshops, and they have to pay quite a lot for these things as well. If you have access to your debate coaches and you would, or your teachers who are willing to do this, and I say that I want to actually focus on style for one day out of one training out of 5, something like that. This is something that you can do on your own as well, because I can't possibly do everything in one shot today as well. Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Ladies and gents? Theophilus. Hi, Theophilus. Think you can ask your question? And he's gone. He's still there, yeah. Hi, Theophilus, can you hear us? I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Joel, I can't quite hear him. I'm not sure if his mic is live.
His mic is switched on.
Okay. Kai, can you hear us? You can ask your question. Okay, perhaps it's a technical issue. We'll let him sort it out. If there's someone else with a question that you can ask. Oh, by the way, it is 11:48. Joel, I don't know what you want to do. Do you want to give them the option of leaving and just staying if they want to hear some more?
Yeah.
Or I'm comfortable.
Yeah, you guys can stay on if you would like to, but the class will end at 12 p.m. So
okay.
These are like the last few questions for this particular class.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Oh, since while I'm here, I might as well plug. I think you guys saw my video, and that's actually on a YouTube channel called Myat San. That's just my name, MYATSAN, one word. I also have a website that's called debatable.org. So it's debate and then ABLE. So like able to debate, debatable.org. So there's some additional material that I have there. I haven't updated it in a while, but there's some material there that might be useful, right? That you can get as well in this case. All right. Any other questions, ladies, gentlemen?
You are allowed to unmute your mic on your own now, so you can.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Your mics if you wish to ask.
Okay. All right. The office is going to try again. Yeah. Questions, the office? I think the mic is just dead, unfortunately. We can't hear anything. Joel, can you hear? It's not me, right?
No, I can't hear him either.
Okay.
What we're going to do is, I'm going to allow you guys to chat on the, I'm going to enable the chat function so that you guys can directly on the chat box instead.
Cool.
So, Theophilus, you can ask your question on the chat box.
Yep. There we are. You can activate the chat group, right? Can you send us some good videos and so on? I can, but I'm not going to, because I would like everyone to actually start exploring. And this is actually a very good way that you are doing your self-improvement. Frankly, if you wait until your debate training sessions to try to work on your debate, you're not going to get that much better. You'll find that some of the best sports teams in Singapore or everywhere else, their team members are practicing on their own a lot. Right, the basketball team members are just like practicing dribbling every day. ACS, the school that I went to, was very big on rugby, right? So every recess, the rugby team members are just practicing passing balls to themselves, right? So that they can actually build this up. And I find that some of the debaters tend to have very slow progression in terms of improving their skill sets, because essentially they only train during official CCA hours and then never again. So I would like everyone to try to start Googling, right? To say that good videos that on style, good public speaking methods. You can go to websites, you can find videos, you can find podcasts, right? And you need to find the type of research that helps you, right? You might be someone who does not like all of that. You just want to read a book, and there are also a lot of books which are quite good on this as well. You need to discover one, what is your preferred method of learning if it is going to be something that you learn on your own, and then after that you need to find what these good sources are. So I don't want to be very prescriptive here, because that might not work for you. And the second thing is, this is actually sort of a self-discovery kind of thing as well. So really encourage everyone to do that, right, as well. Can style be used to explain a complex topic in an argument? Yes, and not only for complex topics, but also for complex policies, right? So for instance, being able to tell simple anecdotes can be a problem if you're using them as examples, right? So when you try to make the analogy, so for instance, analogies are not always very good when it comes to providing factual evidence that something has happened, right? So but however, if you want to use an analogy and a personal anecdote just to explain this policy or explain an argument, then it can actually be quite useful in making it absolutely clear, right, for everyone else. So for instance, right, there's a very complicated argument. Hi, honey, that's my wife in the background, right? Yeah, she's okay. So for instance, when you're trying to explain a complex topic, like we'll talk about nuclear, right, power, and how much power, right, a nuclear reactor actually pumps out. And when you're saying things like this produces so much gigajoules, it doesn't quite make sense for anybody, right? But if you actually want to be very stylistic and you actually want to say it, right, that means that that particular nuclear power, right, in 1 minute of power production can charge my cell phone for the next 1 million years. It's very stylistic, but you just get that impression that you otherwise would not have get, right, from out there at all. How do you find your own personal style? Very good question. One, right, you need to remember we are already effective communicators in one way. We communicate every day with other people. We talk to other people, and we are conveying information and we're receiving information. As a result, right, you would have eventually settled on a form of communication with other people that is effective. That's why you use it. And so you want to use that, right? But for a debate setting, you can be a little bit more formal, a little bit louder because it's a much larger group, but it won't differ too much from what you're already doing on a day-to-day basis, because that is what's effective, and that's why you settle on that method as well. The second thing is, let's say that you want to have a certain persona for the debate and you want it to be a very clear, like, adaptation of this is the style that I want to have. Then it's trial and error, right? You can use it. You might not even want to have one fixed mode of debating, as I mentioned earlier. Otherwise, you will sound like Brick inside the video from the movie Anchorman, just loud noises, right? And you want to have some options so that if you're in an auditorium and you're speaking to 300 students, you want to have a certain style. If you are talking to 300 students who are non-debaters, you need to switch to a different style as well. So you want that flexibility and the ability to adapt. But if you're trying to find what works, trying to see what works for others is perfectly fine, but try it and assess to see if it does work for you, right? I've seen speakers who were copying some of the wrong things, right? So she watched a lot of videos, and even though the British accent was not her natural accent, she kept trying to use it in a debate, right? So every time she started the speech, and she's not the only one, some other guys have tried to do it too. So they all sounded like, well, hello, right? Okay, and so sometimes when you do that, that can become a problem, and then the accent cannot hold, right? But it's actually more of an impediment at that point, rather than something that's actually helping you. You will have to be careful about, not being too colloquial, and because in case you come out as rude, etc., you can't be swearing. And there's also the problem, unfortunately, our normal communication is can be very, very colloquial and Singlish, right? So, but you can't quite go out there and say, hey, we have to ban the death penalty lay, otherwise all the innocent people die lay. How can't quite deliver a speech like that either, right? So we still have to keep that formal presentation. Is there a certain structure we should have a style? Should metaphors we use the other? Okay, again, right? There's no hard and fast formula. You have to look at what is the time available for you in your speech. Is this an appropriate time to use it, right? And I have found that even if I was in the third speaker role, I was able to use a joke, and I used that metaphor at the start because it was appropriate for that particular moment, and not if it was not appropriate in the moment, then I don't use it at all. The bigger takeaway is that you're actually considering it at that point in time, rather than to just think only about strategy, content, etc. Let's do something that'll make the room happy, right? In this case. But it's a little bit unfortunate. A lot of the time when we debate and practice, we don't have any audience members. It's just the judge. And sometimes the judge might not even really care, or the coach might not really care, right, that much. So, which is why I actually encourage you to join public speaking events, or actually run public speaking events, or have more practice sessions where there's an audience and they can actually give you feedback as well. So, but if you want to do this, then what I recommend is that you try different stylistic elements that we talked about. I'm going to open with a joke. I'm going to open with a quote. And how can I use a quote, right? Some quotes are effective if you mention who said it. Some quotes are more effective if you don't mention who said it. So you got to try both. So for instance, when I said power comes from the barrel of a gun, that makes sense in itself. Quite powerful, the phrase. But if I say this is what Mao Zedong said, then people get confused. Like, what does Mao Zedong have to do with the Second Amendment and gun control? But when I say this is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people, the wise words of Abraham Lincoln. Now, I'm deliberately trying to show that these words have weight because it was said by one of the finest statesmen in our history. Then it has an impact. That's why I mention it as well. So you have to practice all of these different things in this case. What's the highest score someone can score for a debate? I mentioned it earlier, right? As well. Oh, this is a private. My bad. Right. Okay. So, but anyways, it's 32. Right. In the World Schools Debating Championships format, you need to be aware of the fact that for a lot of debate formats, they're not putting the stylistic score in a explicit column to say that you scored this much for style, right? So you get the holistic score of 75. So you don't know whether you're scoring high for style or not. But I'll talk purely about the World School style because that one does have an explicit category. It's 32, as mentioned earlier, but your content score and your strategy score may also be higher because of your style score. It can actually have a roll-on effect, because if your speech was very clear, not only are you getting scores for style, the argumentation that you're putting forward is also clearer to everyone, and so it probably impacts more, and as a result, you're scoring higher. Your speech is much neater and more organized because you're more concerned about clarity. As a result, your strategy score actually goes up as well, right? I have a question which says, is it necessary to return to an anecdote or a joke? It is not necessary, but it's often quite useful, right? So for instance, it's called bracketing. Bracketing is when you open with something and then you end with that same theme so that there is some, so there's an end point to that particular speech, right? And so what we want to do is to make sure that we basically have a way of coming back to that, and that last 10 seconds is actually spent on that. I would like to mention why this is actually an important thing. When do you get your scores for the speech? Now, some people think that what happens in a debate is the judge is just going to take notes, then after that, kick the debaters out of the room, and then finally start to look through the notes and then give the scores. Some judges will do that. I don't like it. That's not actually what's supposed to happen. What actually needs to happen is that a judge in the World Schools format needs to give the score straight away at the end of each speaker. They can adjust it slightly, right? But they need to essentially give what your immediate impressions of this person is. And you can, since all you're doing is evaluating the speaker on how well, right, the stylistic components were integrated, how good was the content, You know, was it a very well organized speech? Do we have proper logical links, and do we have enough proper examples to substantiate what was being said? So you have all of that, and then you can give the score straight away. You can give a score to the first speaker of the proposition. You don't have to wait to see what happens in the rest of the debate. You can give the score straight away. But subconsciously, the judge is actually going to score you during these two moments. One, at the start of your speech. Once they hear your speech, they already kind of think, either consciously or subconsciously, this is going to be a good speech. This is going to be an 80. Or sometimes they basically go, this is going to be a bad speech because you have such a terrible opening. You just come out scratching your head going, what's the motion, huh? Oh yeah, okay, good afternoon. No, actually it's good morning. So then they basically think it's going to be a bad speech. So that already sets an anchor as to where your score is likely to go, right? It might drop from a very high initial impression, but it won't drop as low compared to if you started with a very bad impression as well. The second time is at the end of your speech, and that's why you want to end strong, right? Rather than just desperately trying to finish every single point that you have, going into the excess time and you're hearing the repeated bells, you actually end up with a very bracket. And so coming back to my point, we know that power comes from a barrel of a gun. And if, right, criminals continue to have these guns, then we will be the fish in the barrel that they shoot. And this is why we call for a universal ban on firearms. So proud to propose, right? So there's a connection, right, to what was actually said earlier. There's a little bit of wordplay, right? And so that can work as well, all right? So those are some of the things that we've said. Okay, 12 o'clock. I think we'll call it a day, so that you guys can go for your lunch, etc. as well. And we don't want to keep Joel here any longer. There's another class coming afterwards as well. I hope that everyone got some of the things that you may have not been very clear about for style answered. And if this was something that you found useful, we can always have more classes in the future. All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.